It's the story of a heist right after the events of Hurricane Katrina. This was directed by the RZA, and this film definitely has, I think, what works the best for this film is the atmosphere it's going for. To have this sort of New Orleans heist that has quite a lot of style, quite a lot of character to it, that I think elevates it. In addition to having a bit of like commentary for how hard it is to struggle out in New Orleans. So the main character we follow is Blink, who's played by Shameik Moore. And we initially follow Blink and all his friends before the events of Hurricane Katrina. So he's living in New Orleans. He's an aspiring artist. He has some ideas for like a great comic book that's gritty and violent that he wants to get out there. And he has dreams of making this happen. And he's got a wife and he's got a kid, but he's like, you know what? I can make this happen. And then Hurricane Katrina hits. And it kind of changes everything. Like, it hits his home, and his home is damaged. But in terms of like seeking a means of help for that, it doesn't seem like much help is coming. He seeks federal aid and assistance and is essentially denied it. He seeks a job trying to be an artist, but they mark down his work as derivative. Don't really feel there's anything of value there. So with nowhere else to turn, Blink basically gets together with all his friends and decides to get involved in some gangster dealings, mainly dealing in heists of casinos. And they end up working alongside the mob boss called Cousin, who's played by T.I. with a white stain on his face, which makes him recognizable. And the thing is, like, you're going to find, like, there's a lot of familiar actors in this who have kind of, like, a very interesting look to them that you wouldn't normally see on them. I mean, T.I. seems like he kind of, like, would blend it into this role, and he fits it kind of like a glove, playing that very, like, sinister, kind of, like snarky crime boss. Especially since, like, he's handed sequences that really work well for his character, where, he's basically argued, like, his sadistic pleasure is essentially watching dogs bite off people's balls. So yeah, like, he's extreme enough that you're not quite going to forget that character. We also have a few other notable names here. We have Wesley Snipes playing Lawrence, who's just kind of like hiding out in a shack, who kind of like Blink comes to as a last resort, somebody he doesn't want to come to, but realizes he has to go there. And then, probably one of the more, before we get to that, we got to mention Ethan Hawke is another person involved with this whole ordeal. And basically he wants to like shuffle the money around as well. But then we get to Terrence Howard as the Saint, who kind of looks like this this Bayou crime boss, and it's like, I can't see like Terrence Howard as this, and yet there he is on the screen. Like, wow, this is a very big change of pace here, and like it's hard because like it kind of works. Like, you're kind of like, okay, you know what? He's holding his own for this role, but it's so strange to have him. Like this kind of crime boss who believes that he owns New Orleans and he does all his business within the church. It's like, man, this story gets a little crazy in terms of like the characters it involves. Especially for a film that by the time it gets to the end, it more or less becomes, like the tragic heist film that we expect. And it's shot gorgeously. I love the way they stage the heist. Like they find just the right moments to use the montage. They find just the right moments to slow it down and elongate it and speed it up and make it more intense. RZA really does well in that department. He has a very engrossing directing style that works well for this type of heist film. At the same time, I don't really feel like there's a lot within this. It feels like this film could have said like a little bit more. Like it has that, like, I could easily see Spike Lee making a film like this, but then like going the extra mile to like sort of like hammer in that that theme about being left behind when disaster comes, and more cruel people will essentially get pushed aside, and the only way to live is to be more cruel, and you could just end up dying in the process if you don't have enough power. Now, that being said, if you watch this film, like, stick around for the mid-credit sequence, which actually kind of like changes the ending. It gives off a much different vibe with that mid-credit ending. So definitely check that out if you want to see two different ways that the film ends. But like it's weird because like when we follow the stuff with Blink and like with him trying to like best T.I., I feel like that really works. Like Moore really is in his own in this role, where he feels like there's all this pressure on him and that he has to make things work and he has to find like some money fast, and he can feel like the tension building on him. That really works well for that character. But then like every time like we venture off to these other characters like Ethan Hawke playing Jackson Sims or Wesley Snipes or Terrence Howard, there's always that moment where it kind of takes you out of the film. We're just kind of like, oh yeah, there's Wesley Snipes, and you're like, oh yeah, there's Terrence Howard. I haven't seen these guys in a while, and they're playing very, very almost like, I was gonna say over the top, but they don't quite distract to that degree, but they're close. They have this theme to them, and they lay into it thick. And like for Snipes, I think it kind of works. I think for Ethan Hawke, I think he's trying, but I don't think Hawke is quite as versatile to perfectly pull off that kind of role. Terrence Howard is just kind of like, you look at it and it's like it's an interesting character, but it's like, man, Howard's laying it on thick here. It's kind of bordering on over the top here. But yeah, like it finds the right moments to be intense and somber, and action driven. And that climax, which admittedly, like there's a few moments where it took me out of the climax, like they're showing the footage on television, and the footage that they show with like his with Blink's wife watching it, the news footage is like cuts to multiple angles, so they just took like the footage that they shot and just put it on the news footage, which is kind of distracting. Little things like that took me out of the movie here and there, but overall, I think it works well as a heist film. I feel like I said, with like the Spike Lee element, I feel like it could have benefited from being even blunter with the themes that it's trying to get across. But for being little more than a heist film, I think it works. I think the cast here is really strong. Particularly Elza Gonzalez, I think, does a really good job here as well. Yeah, so it's one of those films like, you're mostly going to watch for the cast. You're like, oh, if you got to watch everything that Wesley Snipes and Terrence Howard have been in, yeah, you should definitely check this out. And you might get get a little bit of a thrill out of it. I got a few thrills here and there. In particular, I like the prologue that sets up Blink's comic book, which is definitely speaking to the tone and the tensions of New Orleans. And I thought that was like a really strong way to open up the film, and a lot of elements where I felt like it could have flown off the rails. It doesn't quite. It always feels like it's skating that edge of trying to be just crazy enough, but then ground us again. And that's mostly because of Shameik Moore's performance, which I think really holds this film together, especially when you're dealing with characters that border on cartoonish with like the Saint and Lawrence and Jackson Sims, who kind of feel like players we expect from this type of heist film, and T.I. too to some extent, but I think for the most part it holds together, and as a heist film it's not too bad. It's got just enough moving parts here. I don't think it hammers home the theme quite as hard as it should be, but for just heist thrills with an interesting setting, it works. It works pretty well, I think. So, for Cutthroat City, 3 out of 5 stars.